Hello and welcome to our online Global MSc event. Really good to be with you. My name's David White and I'm a consultant with Global MSc, and it's my privilege to be with you this afternoon and to take you through our online programme. It truly is a global event. We are being joined by over 30 other countries other than the UK. So reaching out to a massive audience, and we really hope you have a good experience with us in this programme. The event content, of course, is artificial intelligence and video content analytics, a subject I know is of interest to many, many of us in the security industry. There's nothing artificial about the content and the specialist speakers that we have for you during our programme. We have a range of eminent speakers to navigate our way through this. If I can just summarise who they're going to be with you, that's Tony Porter. He's going to be with us as perhaps one of his last opportunities to present as the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, as his tenure in that post comes to an end by December this year. He, of course, has taken a prominent role and an advisory role, and particularly around the use of facial recognition systems within law enforcement. So some interesting content to come from there. Philip Ingram, MBE, is joining us with his considerable experience to provide an insight into the Salisbury Novichok incident of a couple of years ago in 2018, and he will consider how video analytics can be utilised in those investigations and applied in a strategic way to mitigate any impact on any other such incidents. Philip and Tony will be joined in a closing Q&A panel with Christian Moran, who is joining us as the Vice President of Integrations from Genetec. He'll be with us hopefully from Canada. And Derek Maltby will also be in conversation with Noel Sheeran, who is the Vice President in EMA with Pelco, which is now a Motorola Solutions company. So it's in that context we hope to bring you this really substantive content over a relatively short period of time. And our sponsors to help us do that, just need to reference them. A couple of them already mentioned. Genetec, of course, Pelco, and indeed the International Security Journal. So we thank them all for their support to enable us to bring this event to you, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. It's my joy to introduce you to the first speaker, and that is Philip Ingram, MBE. Already mentioned, he's a widely publicised journalist specialising in the security and intelligence arenas. He has built a long and senior career in the British military intelligence with years of experience in all aspects of intelligence and security, as well as strategic planning. Philip now runs his own business, a company called Greyhair Media, and specialises in delivering informed content. And no doubt at all, he's going to inform us this afternoon with his presentation. So without any further from me, I'll introduce Philip to you, and I'll see you in a short while. Thank you.
David, thank you very much indeed for that. And can I thank the Global MSc team for inviting me here today. 30 different countries, that's absolutely fantastic. Many of you will know and will have heard of me beforehand, but for those who don't, building on David's very generous introduction, I was a former intelligence officer with the British military at a very senior level for many years. And I bring that into my journalist career now to be able to inform on different things that have happened. And today I want to talk to you about biometrics and CCTV as a win-lose combination from a former intelligence officer's perspective. But I'm going to use as a vehicle the story around the Novichok poisonings in Salisbury. Now, who'd have ever thought that a couple of years ago, when Novichok was first used, we'd now be into a biological pandemic that is changing our lives. The world is certainly an interesting place. So today, biometrics, do they help or do they hinder?
Investigators are now retracing the victim's steps to get a better idea.
And how did they deploy it?
Could have been somewhere like the ventilation system of their car. So it was contained within that nutshell, like that needle in the haystack.
The most likely route is that someone during his walk through Salisbury has rushed past him and wiped this on his skin.
It could have been a poison or a toxin that was ingested, and they are fast acting.
Ingested, was it
And it
airborne?
only requires the tiniest of doses.
Experts point out the Russians have a long history of developing and using undetectable poisons, but officials are not directly blaming Russia so
For
far.
the first time, a weapon of mass destruction by a state sponsor of terrorism has been employed against one of our allies.
So that's the introduction to episode 2 of the BBC series, The Salisbury Poisonings, that I understand are going to be broadcast in the United States this fall. And if you haven't seen it, I think it's still on BBC iPlayer, well worth watching, because it gives you the human story behind what could have been written for a James Bond movie without any problems whatsoever. So taking you back in history, we go back to the early March in 2018. When 2 individuals flew into Gatwick Airport. On the bottom right-hand corner of the slide there, you can see them coming through the passenger control on their way in. Went up to London and stayed at in a little bed and breakfast, the picture of which you can see at the top right of the corner, and then of the slide. And then they took the train down to Salisbury on the Saturday to have a little look around. And you can see them coming out of the airport, and then in the bottom left-hand corner going out through Salisbury railway station. Now, Salisbury, very interesting. It's very close to the UK's chemical defence establishment at Porton Down. And that was one of the reasons why Salisbury was probably chosen as a potential target area. But you can see the pictures that I'm pulling together there are from CCTV, more of which in a moment. So what then happened was on the Saturday they went and had a little look at the house where you can see the police car or the police Land Rover sitting outside in the middle. That just happened to belong to an individual called Sergei Skripal. Sergei Skripal had been a former colonel in Russian military intelligence, the GRU, their oldest intelligence organisation. But he had defected and had been working for MI6 for a number of years and had been resettled back in the UK after he was released from Russian prison as part of a prisoner exchange. Nobody expected him to be targeted. The Russians had pardoned him. He was put as a relatively low risk, but geopolitical events that were going on at the time, this happened exactly 14 days before the Russian presidential election. President Vladimir Putin had never been quiet in the press about his lack of support for those that had betrayed Mother Russia. And he wanted to do something that influenced the global community by stopping dissenters from interfering with his position in the election, but also to be able to then build on that and try and get a populist support amongst the Russian people. Again, you can see from the pictures there, the 3 in the bottom left-hand corner are all from local CCTV. More in a moment. So CCTV and the GRU. We have CCTV coverage of the 2 GRU agents using false identities coming in through Gatwick. That's been identified quickly. We have CCTV coverage, bottom right, of the same 2 GRU agents going through Salisbury railway station on the Saturday and the Sunday. Question. They were through London. They'll have gone out through Waterloo railway station. There's CCTV on all the trains on that. Where's the CCTV coverage that there is for that? Now, this is an ongoing and live investigation, so not everything that the security services or the police have will have been released into the public domain. But there's a question mark over what's there. We then go on to the left-hand side of the slide, and we see CCTV from public sector CCTV around Salisbury. We then see other public sector, and then at the top left-hand corner, some CCTV from a shop where the 2 individuals had been looking at some coins in the window. So we're seeing a real mixture of public, private, and CCTV deployed in critical national infrastructure situations, and we're building up a good picture. And the security services and the police managed to pull this together very quickly indeed. Not as quickly as it seems as the investigative journalist site Bellingcat, who very quickly identified the 2 individuals as Colonel Dr. Alexander Mishkin and Colonel Chepegi of the GRU. And they publicly put out an awful lot of detail behind them from what could be found through open source intelligence perspectives. But with the CCTV that we've got through there are a number of questions, because the individuals on the Saturday spent a little bit of time in Salisbury. Nobody has clarified who else they met, potentially. Now, from an intelligence perspective, carrying out this sort of operation, they won't have randomly gone onto the train and randomly gone down and had a quick look for themselves and decided to come back the next day and wipe a bit of Novichok on the front door of Sergei Skripal's house. There would have been a big preparation operation going on beforehand, where teams will have gone in, they'll have reconnaissance the area, they'll have checked that Sergei Skripal hadn't invited all the neighbours around for a big barbecue on the Saturday night or the Sunday morning. They'll have known Yulia was coming in. They wouldn't have been looking at the other friends that were there. So there's an awful lot more information that has not come out into the public domain. It could be part of the investigation. It could be that there wasn't the joining together of the CCTV systems in the way that we would expect in a modern society. And actually, if you go into Salisbury and look at it, at the time there was a brand new CCTV system had been put in across the city, but there was a little bit of a dispute going on between Salisbury City Council and Wiltshire Council, and Wiltshire Council had put it in as to who was funding the whole system. And that was, whilst the system was working, there were frictions that had happened in discussing the funding of a system and how it was going to be managed and looked at that may or may not have had an impact on its complete serviceability. Something to bear in mind whenever we're negotiating the business side of things. Just to finish it off, unfortunately, after Chepega and Mishkin had left the country, several months later, whilst the World Cup was going on in Russia, Charlie Rowley on the right picked up a bottle of what he thought was perfume. He was a homeless man and had kept it as a present for his girlfriend, Dawn Sturges, on the left. And unfortunately, when he gave it to her on her birthday, she spread it on her wrists, and it wasn't a perfume bottle, it contained Novichok. However, you have to question why it was still in a sealed packet, in a sealed container, if it had been used beforehand. And if it was in a sealed packet and sealed container had been used, what happened to the container that had been used? And what happened to the protective equipment that the GRU agents will have been wearing? Because this stuff is deadly. It's designed to injure first and kill second, but it is deadly in the tiniest amounts. So we get a picture of the GRU guys, and Bellingcat put together an absolutely fantastic investigation where they outed their whole careers. They found that they had been given huge medals by President Putin. They had distinguished careers in the Russian military and Russian military intelligence. And when that was exposed, they then went on to RT.com and gave a little briefing saying that no, they were just there to see the tower, the famous tower in Salisbury, because they'd read so much about it. But the weather, both of them had come from Russia, where the snow was measured in tens of meters, not just meters. The weather and the snow had stopped them from exploring where they wanted to go to, so they came back again. The Russians have a doctrine that they call Varanya, which is telling a story which you know nobody's going to believe, but nobody's going to question to try and excuse what you've done. They did that. We saw President Putin coming out with lots of statements about it must have escaped from Porton Down. It was the British what did it. It was the Americans what did it. It was someone else what did it. The Russians have got another doctrine for that, and that's called maskirovka and masking. Donald Trump, who won't be in position for much longer, calls that fake news. It's nothing new. But given the power of the internet and the power of social media, it is a real weapon and can influence people's thinking. And Vladimir Putin will have been sitting in Moscow with a white cat on his lap, with a very large glass of vodka over ice behind his big desk, sipping it slowly, watching the debate going on in UK Parliament, where the conclusions by the British government that the Russians were behind it were actually being questioned by MPs sitting in Parliament and doing Vladimir Putin's job for him, instead of harmonising the world to try and hold him to task for what's happening. Now, that's what happened behind it and all the rest of it. But there's a few things that come into here from the AI, from the CCTV, and from the analytics perspective that I want to bring out. And they can be for the good or they can be for the bad. They can be for the good in looking at how these investigations can be put together. We have on that slide a fantastic set of images from across the years that can be put together and fed into AI to bring up a perfectly good model that could be used to track the movement of these individuals across the place. It may have happened. Because it's an active investigation, I don't know, and I don't think we'll know, because sufficient evidence has been released for the Crown Prosecution Service to bring charges against the individuals, and for that to flag up an Interpol Red Notice asking for their extradition. For those that don't know about the Interpol Red Notices looking for their extradition and a combined European arrest warrant, Russia does not recognise the use of the Red Notice against any Russian citizen and will not extradite anyone from Mother Russia to any other part of the world to answer for their charges. Russia is also one of the most prolific users of Interpol Red Notices to get Russian dissenters arrested across the globe and sent back to Russia. Double standards or what? But we've got a good CCTV picture. We've got a good picture of where people are moving as they go around this. And if we combined in with that a little bit of what we recognise from an analytics perspective, from a facial recognition analytics perspective, then it shouldn't be difficult to get all of the capability that's there, put it together through a smart piece of video analytics with AI built on top of it, and track these individuals. Especially when you look at the little symbol I've got on the picture of the passport in the centre, because that's a biometric passport, a biometric identity document. And across the globe, all of the border forces are building up this biometric picture that there is of everyone as they travel around internationally. Fantastic. That aids the investigation. That gives us the tools that we need to do it. This is a subject that I know Tony Porter is very well aware of, and has some concerns about the use of biometric data, and is something that I think we can bring up in questions, and I'd love to hear the views of everyone out there as to what you think should be used here, because that's fantastic from an investigative perspective. However, I'm an intelligence officer. Now, my organisation luckily very rarely had to put people in incognito to do things, but the two GRU individuals came in incognito. If their biometric profile is on a database somewhere, is that good for being a spy? Not necessarily, because as soon as you walk through with a different passport and a different identity, and that flags up, it'll flag up that you are not who you say you are. So from an espionage perspective, biometric and AI identity is not a good thing. From an investigative perspective, it's fantastic and can help enormously. So, as we get into the reality and we get greater processing power and AI starts to take over and we look at the improvement in the imagery, the image of me on the right is a complete 3D scan, and it can do a complete body scan. We can get away from just facial recognition technology and into full body recognition technology. But we need to look at the implications from a privacy perspective and where your biometric identity is held and how it's managed from a personal privacy perspective, and to make sure that it cannot be abused in any way, shape or form. So that's balance between what's good for the state and what's good for the individual. Biometrics and national security, how do we control it? It's not just facial recognition. You've got iris scanning, you've got voice scanning, you've got fingerprints. It's a debate. And it's a debate that we have to have, and we have to have soon, because the technology is there today to make this happen. I look forward to chatting to you and answering as many questions as I can through the question session that we have at the end of today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Philip. We were promised informed content, and I think you'd agree we certainly got that. It's a fascinating investigation, not least from the use of security cameras point of view, but indeed, you know, still in the UK, and no doubt well beyond the UK. Where this goes next and all the implications, we've yet to find out, as Philip said to us. What we're going to do now then is we're going to move to a more conversational style, and we're going to introduce Derek Maltby, who's the Managing Director of Global MSC, who's going to be joined by Noel Sheeran, the Vice President of Sales in Europe and Africa for Pelco, and they're going to have a conversation about Pelco and where they are at the current time. So I'm going to invite Derek and Noel to come to the stage and leave them in your good hands whilst they have their conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hi, Noel.
Afternoon. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Yeah, good.
Yeah, good.
Not many people would know you, so this is your opportunity to explain who you are. But I've got a few questions, and I guess there will be a number of questions later on from the people who are looking in. But Pelco, the worldwide brand that we know it, and recently acquired by Motorola Solutions. And we're wondering what difference this has made to what Pelco will be offering in the marketplace and in the UK in particular.
Thanks. For Pelco, this has been a wonderful opportunity. Motorola have come in with a huge backing and support for us. They're going to show us the innovations they have behind the scenes, and we'll hopefully get into what that means for us as Pelco and Motorola and the wider group as we go through these questions. Pelco, we've been around for 63 years. You know, you have 90 years of Motorola history. Combine the two, combine the innovations that sit within both groups and the teams of innovators we have behind the scenes inside the Motorola entity. It's just a wonderful opportunity for us, especially in the UK, as we start to talk about smart cities and how we move forward with the video of the future.
You touched on smart cities. Now, smart cities is the buzzword, so people, organisations, especially local authorities, are aspiring to smart cities and all the bells and whistles that IP and connectivity and IoT can bring. How does Pelco fit into that offering?
Pelco is a camera brand. You know, we've been around for a long time, and as the industry knows, Pelco has a wonderful history of protecting environments, people, things, businesses. What we see with the Motorola and Pelco coming together, the Motorola Solutions business, is we can now start to talk about the actionable intelligence gathered through cameras and the data that's captured and how we interrogate that data for the good, for protection of life, support of the blue light services, support of industry and business in general. But that end-to-end piece of starting at PCR and radios and all the way through to analytics, as you've heard from Philip and the others today, this is the future. The combined operational footprint that can start to be worked on, developed, as we go through the links from the edge of the city through to the buildings, through to the people and transits and so on. So it's a very exciting time for us.
One of the things I notice when going to local authority control rooms is the disconnect between radio systems, as in Shopwatch radio systems, Pubwatch, and the cameras. And they're running numerous systems which never talk to each other.
Yes.
And here I see a perfect opportunity for Motorola to integrate with the camera systems. You've got one graphic user interface, I suppose, and intelligence which is being shared between different systems.
Absolutely, and you've got to break that into components. So for the operators, you know, the police forces, the security managers, the local authorities who run these organisations, it's about data and being able to give the guys and the girls on the street the ability to do something with information that's important. If you have disparate systems that don't communicate and work together, it's just different sets of data. You start to combine those and bring those into one common platform, then you start to have a very effective operational template to work from. For us at Pelco and for Motorola as the wider group, we want to be that brand of choice who brings all these things together in an operational environment.
Thank you. So I was conscious at Pelco we're always the front runner in hardware security for many years whilst I've been involved in this security industry. But you lost your dominance, you've lost your way in the last few years. So what is changing and how can we expect Pelco to be seen as a first choice solution once more?
I think that's a fair assessment for Pelco. I think we've drifted off to the sidelines. I think that the acquisition is going to allow us to become front and center again. The investment that Motorola are putting into video and analytics in general is huge, and it's going to have a massive impact on how we deliver that input-output to the industry. I think everybody who knows the industry knows Pelco and knows what we were and what we were about as a brand. 63 years of history is quite a significant thing. When you look at the product placement that we used to have, you can go through a number of films where Pelco were in front and center. Yeah. So I think for us as a brand and as part of the Motorola family, it's important for us to be front and center again.
So how will we recognise that? Because I used to have Pelco representatives knocking on my door, and I guess all these people are no longer there. So are you intending to recruit more? How are you going to raise your game in this country?
Yeah, it's back to the old school customer first message. We're going to go back to our client base. We're going to go back to the industry and make sure that we are being seen and being heard. Motorola have, again, committed to investing in Pelco, and that means from a technology standpoint and being able to develop at pace and make sure the technology is right behind the scenes, but also in hiring the right talent and taking the right people. We're starting again, right? But it's massively important that we have the right technology and the right people, and that's how Pelco will come back naturally.
I think people will be pleased to hear that, because you'll be aware that the cost of security hardware is being driven down by Asian competition, and they filled that void that Pelco sort of left behind. How can you regain that market share whilst retaining the quality, but if necessary, cutting your costs to compete with these cheaper products?
I'm not a fan of the cost comparison, because you have different levels of engagement and activity. Pelco, I'd like to think, didn't relinquish the cost element, and because we were never in that space. We're about quality, we're about future, we're about technology, and having a brand that is associated with stability and being able to see into the future and be at the leading edge of that. Do I want to talk about price? Probably not, because we should be a different conversation. It should be a conversation about the quality of our products and the quality of our team.
So the products offered by Pelco were always very scalable and user-friendly. What have you got on the roadmap now that will ensure you remain at that cutting edge of technology and compare favourably with your competitors out there?
Yeah, the competition's strong, and we as Pelco and as Motorola Solutions have to be, we are acutely aware of what we have to achieve, and that is investing in the technology that we have, being at the forefront of innovation and challenging the normal and being different, looking at how we progress through the operational layers and having all of the components and weaponry at our disposal that we can share with our customer base. So, in innovation and investment in innovation and technology is the key for us. It's the way in which we will come back to the forefront, but it's about listening to people and understanding what the market wants. And we're here to innovate, we're here to be different, and we're here to challenge.
So we're talking about the UK, but presumably the brand, as in Pelco, lost its way in America as well, which is its home?
Yes and no. Pelco is still a very strong brand within certain sectors, but what you have and what we will have is the ability to be strong and powerful again and drive from the front. Rather than just being there, we're going to be present. There's a big difference between just being around and being present. We certainly aim to be far more present in every business market, and that's a global statement.
Thank you, Noel.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you very much, Derek and Noel there. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Some more informed content, and I know many of you out there will be well aware of the brand, well aware of the products and when I travel around the world in relation to CCTV and control rooms, often Pelco is the brand that's out there still, and I'm sure many of you will be reassured perhaps by what Noel was saying about their plans for the future and how they pick up and go from the now. What I want to do now is to introduce our next speaker, which for many, certainly in the UK, and he's well travelled overseas also, is our Surveillance Camera Commissioner, Tony Porter. He's an intelligence specialist, most recently within the financial sector, and he's a retired senior police leader. His experience spans community and business engagements, international counter-terrorism, and serious organised crime. Tony's commission as the Surveillance Camera Commissioner comes to an end at the end of December. So, in particular, he's been a great supporter of our events over recent years. But we're delighted to have him with us again, and perhaps one of his last speaking engagements in his current role. Tony, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good to see you, my friend. Good to see you. Anyway, the floor is yours now. I'll leave you to it.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be at Global MSC for what may well be my last public contribution as a Surveillance Camera Commissioner in England and Wales. I've certainly enjoyed the hospitality of Global for 7 years. They are, by any measure, the finest provider of finger buffets, which none of us are receiving for today's efforts. But if you happen to get to next year's conference, I do urge you to go. But more importantly, Global, in my view, represent a unique brand of conference, security conference. The caliber of input is always extraordinarily high, and the caliber of challenge I face in the panel is usually pretty tough. And it's tough because I'm dealing with people who understand the business, and that's why I insist on coming. So thank you, Global, for inviting me, and thank you for the delegates for tuning into this input. Over the 7 years I've been Commissioner, I've introduced at Global a number of firsts. I've introduced my certification scheme for public sector video cameras. I introduced the National Surveillance Camera Strategy over 3.5 years ago now. Broader schemes such as secure by default monitoring, and I intend to encourage the new Commissioner next year to launch a product we've been working on this year, which is for consultants installers. So there's a lot to tune into. But today, I'm going to talk about facial recognition. And I'm going to talk about the case that became a global first, I think, in one of the most senior courts in the world to deal with the challenges of facial recognition and its legality. And what I hope to do during the course of this conversation is talk about some of the observations, some of the recommendations to act as guidance for those of you in the industry that want to understand perhaps how to take this forward. So as I say, I've learned the lessons from that court case, and I've now drafted a full and comprehensive guidance that will be used by law enforcement. As we speak, that guidance is with my Queen's Counsel, my legal team that represented me at the Court of Appeal, and in it is a whole range of recommendations that I hope will provide some light to people here that are desperately looking for that light. So I guess this is another first where this conference will hear my thoughts and opinions and indications in relation to the use of facial recognition. Now, those of you at home that happen to listen to the Prime Minister on his daily COVID conference would have been taken aback by the number of metaphors used. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a metaphor here. And I would say, in terms of facial recognition in the UK, and I actually think globally, I think there are some sunny uplands for its use. But there are crocodiles in the ravine that need to be navigated around. And hopefully what I'm about to say will provide some guidance. I want to take you back to 2017, when I became aware for the first deployment of LFR, facial recognition, on a screen in Piccadilly, London. A huge LED screen that caused quite some public contention. And I was contacted by the Times and the Telegraph as the Surveillance Commissioner, and they wanted to know from me its legality, they wanted to know the issues that were raised, they wanted to know what we do about it. Now, I've always endeavoured to be brutally honest in this role, and I hope that that has been respected and recognised by the community that represent. And the bottom line is, I didn't know. It was very complicated. What were the rules? What's the legislation? How should we move forward with this? Is there a law? And I didn't feel fit to answer, so I didn't. I actually stayed silent, and I'm rather glad I did. So let me take you back into Bridges. I mentioned the case. I was, together with the Home Secretary, the Information Commissioner and the Police and Crime Commissioner from South Wales Police, what's called an amicus curiae, or an interested party. And in both the Divisional Court and in the Court of Appeal, I was more than that. I was a fascinated party, because this was law in the making. And I actually tuned in for the 3 days in the Court of Appeal. Nearly every minute. I couldn't quite make every minute because my daughter was getting graduated at one point and I did that online. But it was fascinating following the arguments that came out of that, which I'm going to espouse here. Divisional Court said it was lawful. Mr. Bridges walked past a van in South Wales Police that was using facial recognition. He felt that he had had his biometrics processed unlawfully. The Divisional Court in 2019 said, no, we think that's okay. Court of Appeal in July 2020, this year, heard it and said, no, we don't agree. We think that it failed on 3 grounds. We don't think it was in accordance with the law. We don't think that the police complied with the public sector equality duties. And we think its application of the data protection impact assessment was a little bit wonky. Now, very, very interesting indeed. So how do we move forward in that? Well, the lessons I learned from that, the Court of Appeal, more so at the top of its judgment, recognised that the role of the Surveillance Camera Commissioner and the Code of Practice regulates the use of live facial recognition. Together with other laws, of course, but they recognise the key role of this office and whoever comes forward as being an overseer of the regulation. Both courts also approved my contention that the Code of Practice amounts to a whole system approach. So those of you in the business of surveillance, I do urge you to ensure that you're fully au fait with the Code of Practice. Finally, they said it incorporates and signposts not just the systems and standards and the validation that allows it to be used lawfully, but it also signposts common law, Regulation of Investigation Powers Act, Data Protection Act, GDPR, human rights, public sector equality, and health and safety. It is a basket of confusion, and people out there need a navigator, they need a Sherpa to help you through. So nice words, Commissioner, thank you so much. Now please jump off the fence. Is it lawful? Can we use this technology, or is it not? Well, as I said, there are sunny uplands, and I would say yes. I would say Bridges was very clear in saying that in the right circumstances, it can be used lawfully. But of course, if you used it in the same circumstances as Bridges, then it would be unlawful. The criticisms in the judgment were very specific. Let's look at what they were. Firstly, it wasn't in accordance with the law. So the police needed to focus much more closely on the who was in the watch list and the where that you're looking for the people on the watch list. I've touched on the algorithm bias, the human rights, the evidence capability, all of which needs to feed into legality in police public sector duties. The police didn't do that. And the court said that it's a process, not a product. So every element of the process needs to be in tandem and in step with PSED. And of course, the DPIA needed to be more comprehensive, it needed to be more focused, it needs to be narrowed down. And that's lessons that every organisation can take. Another key lesson for us all is that as a third party working with the police, whether that's a local authority, retail, train station, any of those, the third parties have to comply with the Protection of Freedoms Act and the broader duties therein. Please do not be deluded to think that compliance of facial recognition is compliance to GDPR. The Court of Appeal said it's much broader than that. Data protection is very important, but it's not the only thing to take into account. Legal bit, very quickly. Law enforcement operates under Part 3 of the Data Protection Act. That's slightly different to retail, the private sector, which falls within wait for it, Schedule 1, Part 1 of the Data Protection Act, Schedule 1, Part 2 of the Data Protection Act. You need appropriate policy documents, you need data protection impact assessments, you need Article 6 justification, Article 9 conditions. And if you fall in some of those conditions, there are 20 options. It is very comprehensive. So you really, really do need to have a step guide as to go through this process. So there are two elements depending where you sit. I'm going to deal with the police because that was the bridges, and I've got a short period of time left. So I've produced a report that will be going to police officers, to police chiefs, Home Office, ministers next week. One recommendation is that there needs to be a national procurement strategy for police, that LFR technology needs to be suitable to be able to analyse, to make sure that there's backdoors that can test the algorithms, make sure there's no bias for the algorithms, that there needs to be national standards of that technology within that procurement strategy. I'm going to go through these recommendations at something of a hoof, but I think if you actually take a note, jot them down, you'll start to get an understanding about the complexity. Second recommendation, there needs to be ethical oversight. This isn't just protection of freedoms or data protection or common law. It's freedom of human rights. So I'm recommended the police ethics infrastructure, or indeed the National Digital and Data Ethics Committee. It's a new body, takes notice and oversees. In the retail or private, how you address ethics is a different challenge, but I would urge you to consider it. Another big recommendation is that there needs to be, in my view, an integrated impact assessment. Why? Because if you just look at the volume of assessments you need to do, whether it's DPIA, legitimacy impact assessment, appropriate policy, whether it's operational risk deployment, whether it's a self-assessment tool under POFA, there's probably at the last count 10 to 12. This is impossible, and it needs to be harmonized. And I said this, I think, at the last time I attended Global, and I'll say it again. I think the regulators can do much more to make this an easier terrain for the users. I've endeavored to do that in my time. I haven't always been successful, but I have gained support from some of the regulators that have worked in tandem with me in developing the guidance. Another recommendation is cyber protection, of course, secure by default. Design is part of data protection, but it's also part of the Protection of Freedoms Act. Can your backdoors be hacked? In facial recognition dealings with the most sensitive areas of data processing, so you need to make sure that you have a very solid and robust cyber defence mechanism. Recommendation 6, the government needs to update the code of practice. I've been public and said that I think the Home Office let the police down to an extent. I've called for an update of the code for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm delighted to say that it's now being done. But the police need solid ground to walk upon if they're pushing the boundaries of the law. And I think to an extent they were let down. They needed more solid boundaries, and they had to navigate. There were sentinels in the mist. It wasn't clear the direction they were going, and they had to take a direction. Because I believe this technology will and must be used. And when I said that at a conference in Brussels, it was like tumbleweed rolling across the ground. To say that there was an awful lot of liberals there is one thing, a lot of academics, and I love liberals and I love academics, but actually I also love pragmatists. And this is technology that can save us, save lives, make life better for us all. So let's be sensible about developing criteria around its use. There needs to be a decision-making model for the police around watch lists, about authorizations, an independent authorizing officer, not the officer who's deploying the technology in their own instance. That's akin to marking your own homework. The police might not like this too much because it's more bureaucracy, but I think the 70-odd million people in the country would be reassured that when this highly technical kit is being deployed, it's being deployed under scrutiny. It's being deployed because it's necessary and proportionate. Recommendation 8, I'll go to my notes, a human decision maker. We need to standardize the role of a human decision maker. What's the selection? What's the training program? What's the profile? How do we deploy them? How do we know they're any good? This is a serious role where somebody is deciding upon the infringement of somebody's liberties. Well, let's make sure that that role is a role enshrined in policy, enshrined in training, and is actually something that develops towards a professional direction. I've touched on a relevant suite of performance indicators. I think that's really clear. We need that. And really that takes me, I think, I'm coming towards the end of my 15 minutes. And coming towards the end, potentially, of my final speech as Surveillance Commissioner. I've said before and I say again, I believe there needs to be a review of overt surveillance. I'm a big fan of surveillance, but not so much a big fan of bad surveillance. I think overt surveillance is now that powerful. There needs to be controls. There needs to be stronger regulatory oversight. And I think that can be developed with new statutes to incorporate these new and powerful technologies, whether it's ANPR, live facial recognition, live streaming of body worn. It's now as powerful as covert surveillance. Whether it's as intrusive is another matter, but it's certainly as powerful. And the government need to listen to this and move forward. That's the second to last thing. The last thing I want to say is a thank you to Global, because you've been a great friend of my commission for 7 years, and I say that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to the many people who I've seen over the 7 years. You've been great friends. I know most of you when I turn up, and it's like coming home. And Derek, thank you for the finger buffet. It is outstanding, and I'm going to aim to get there next year because it's just worth the trip to Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's always a pleasure to have you with us, as you well know, and I can assure you there's no finger buffet here today in the studio, but we do have a miraculously appearance of a box of Celebration chocolates, so that's the best we could do for you if you were here. But okay, thank you. Well, don't go away, because obviously, there are probably more questions than answers in the 15 minutes that you had. Certainly, I've got a few buzzing around my head, but we do have some questions in for you, and indeed the rest of the panel. So I'm now going to be joined by our eminent speakers, and I'm hopefully looking for Christian Moran from Genetec, who I believe is going to be joining us from Canada. I'm just looking to see, is he logged on yet? Is he here?
I am here.
Oh, excellent. I can hear you, but I can't. Oh, I can see you now. Fantastic. Yes, we've got you on my screen. So that's welcome. Again, another friend of our seminars and events, Christian, coming across. But this time, of course, he's allowed to stay where he is. And so we're joined by Tony and indeed Christian and Derek and Philip from this morning's session. And of course, we're taking questions. I've had quite a range of questions come in already. Keep them coming in. We can be updated, but I'm going to start with those. We've only got a limited amount of time, so I'm not going to hang around too much. I just want to introduce you to Christian, if I may, with some words that describe who he is. So for those of you who are not familiar with him, he's the lead strategist for cloud services at Genetec. With over 18 years of experience in IT, telecommunications and physical security industries, Christian has an ability to anticipate technological trends, which is helpful because one of my first questions is around that, and drive meaningful organisational growth. He's a multidisciplinary business leader, having managed the operations, customer service, sales, engineering, technical support, professional services and IT teams since joining Genetec in 2002. He's been a very busy guy. His executive leadership then continues to support the strategic direction and success of the company. So again, welcome, Christian. Welcome to you all, Philip, Derek, with us there. So without further ado, I will pick up on that trend as I mentioned in that introduction of Christian. A range of questions here, so we'll go with first. We have a question from Catherine Seddon, who's a quality essential distribution for a UK security surveillance distributor. And she asks, and I'm going to go to Christian with this first because it touches on that technology, the future technologies. She asks, what would be the next technological security innovation which will have the biggest impact on the CCTV global market and specifically the UK market?
Wow, this can actually bring us into many directions. Oh, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. So indeed, there's a number of different avenues that this can be brought in, but I think that what we're seeing is a lot of trends that are coming from the IT industry are hitting us in the security industry, which is helping us accelerate the digital transformation of a number of different processes. I would say that being in this industry for almost 20 years now, is I've seen that, it sometimes lags behind in terms of adopting some of the latest and greatest. and we're catching up to this. And what I've seen with the COVID situation specifically is many organizations, both on the public sector, the private side, have had to reinvent themselves, have had to figure out new ways of doing things. As we are having this event right now in a virtual format, people have to start thinking differently as how they perform their work. So we're seeing an acceleration of how technology can actually impact how people work in a broader sense, as opposed to necessarily kind of maybe a specific feature in terms of technology. I think, there's an acceleration of what a lot of people coin as digital transformation of many different types of workflows or jobs.
That's interesting. From your perspective, Philip, with your sort of broader, where would you go? What did you think is going to be the most sort of biggest impact?
Again, it's interesting. The cynic in me will say the growth of buzzwords. So we hear AI, we hear blockchain, we hear 5G, we hear increase in processing power. But actually, I think the important thing is an increase in understanding behind those buzzwords. That as an industry, we need to pick up and properly understand what they are and realise them so that we can bring them in to meet our current and future needs and understand where the technology innovators like Genetec are and can help them bring in solutions that we really need. Okay. So it's all of it coming together. But I think what the industry needs to do is, instead of being slightly backward-leaning, which I think many of us would agree it is to recognise this, learn a lot, and learn where technology is going and start to become slightly more forward-leaning. That will give Tony's successor a complete and utter nightmare, because at the moment he can't keep up with a backward-leaning industry with the regulation. Trying to keep up with something that's technologically forward-leaning with regulation and legal support and everything else is going to become an even bigger nightmare. Yeah,
okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that response there. Catherine, I hope that answers the question that you posed. It's a very interesting question and a very broad one, but I mean, it isn't just one single factor. There's multiple factors there that are going to influence and impact on the way forward. Here's an interesting one then, and it's difficult to know where to go first with it. So perhaps I'm going to go to Tony, because there's some politics here, Tony, to contend with in this one. It's come from Peter Spindler, and if it's the same Peter Spindler that I remember from last year, Peter, I suspect it probably is. He talks about, with Brexit being on the horizon, what do you consider the implications to be for AI and analytics, given the possible divergence from established human rights legislation and the mechanisms for that? And what, if any, action should delegates tuning in today should be considering in that regard?
Yeah, excellent question. I also know Peter Spindler, and he's clearly saved his most devilish question to wait until I come on the panel. So, Peter, I'm sure you're out there. Thank you so much. I think it is an excellent question. There is soft soundings about the government's approach and attitude to GDPR. I think it's certainly been a matter of public record that the Prime Minister's key advisor thinks that GDPR provides a lockdown on innovation and is unnecessarily restrictive. I also know that the government is very keen to push forward the agenda of AI because AI must surely be, together with other advancing technologies, the very essence of the developing world and how we make our GDP. And I think if you put that mix together, from the soundings we hear, I think there will be a more permissive approach to this kind of technology. I go back to what I said in the talk, the Sunny Uplands. The Court of Appeal didn't press down, even though GDPR has been in post for 2 years. So I do believe that we will move forward and we'll use this technology, but also going back to the manifesto in 2019 of the Prime Minister, he said he was going to introduce legislation. I think he will. So I hope that answers the question. I think the direction of travel is very much a green light, move forward.
Okay, and that divergence that we may experience then around the legislation shouldn't be a barrier to that at all?
No, I don't think it should. It should be an enabler, because we won't be constrained quite as much. There will need to be an equivalence to an extent, but there must be wriggle room. And I think I think our government and politics will look to explore that wriggle room for the benefit of the country, but also for the benefit of the citizen and the value of this technology it can bring.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks for that, Tony. Yeah, it's good. We have one here, and I'm going to pose it to Christian, if I may, from an anonymous source, but it's an interesting question. It's got a COVID flavour to it, Christian. So, how do you feel the current economic and political climate, as a result of COVID, of course, as being a global a pandemic, will affect the industry in terms of supply from China right now? And do you see it as an opportunity for manufacturers in that context?
Well, I clearly see it as an opportunity to actually reduce the current dependency that a lot of our industry has on China right now. And if there's something that this pandemic has brought to light is some of our actions of the past and how we highly concentrated a lot of key supplies in that country. I've seen a lot of our fellow manufacturing partners starting moving a lot of their production capabilities either in Vietnam, in Korea, Mexico, pretty much all around the world. So we're going to basically see, I would say, a greater distribution of this manufacturing capacity, also for certain, I would say, critical goods, specifically in the medical industry, that are starting to be produced locally at many different levels. At least it is right now in Canada. So there's a shift happening, because of the pandemic and because of some of the regulations also that are being imposed by more and more countries with respect to certain types of goods coming out of China.
Okay, thanks very much. Philippe, do you want to pick up on that in terms of the opportunities that may exist then for the industry and particularly the manufacturers with the...
I'll bring the two questions together a little bit because I think there's huge opportunities here. We're seeing governments recognising that you can't rely on single supply chains. And actually, if we look at the China supply and we look at the pre-pandemic discussions that there were around Huawei technology coming into the 5G networks across the UK, the political impact of making technological decisions is being increasingly recognised and will become much more of a factor when solutions are being looked at. But the other thing is the legal framework. We're sitting there, we're developing all of this AI, we're developing cameras that can capture biometric data. We've got the General Data Protection Regulation, which is a good start and should be seen as the basic level for companies to build their standards on. But if we look at the other regulations that are around, we're going to be fortunate this year with a new Protect Duty, or next year with a new Protect Duty for the first time mandating a level of physical security in crowded places. That'll have an impact on technological solutions and everything else. But if we look at the laws that there are behind the technological side of things, on the legal bit, I think in the IT world, we've got the Computer Misuse Act 1990. Well, 1990, Twitter didn't exist. Was Facebook around then? 64K RAM, I think, was everyone was jumping up and down at that sort of thing. And this is a perfect example of where legislation is not around the use of technology is not keeping up with the pace of the growth of technology. So I think as we recognise the threats and opportunities that there are in an increased globalization and deep depolarization of supply chains, we're also going to recognize, or governments are going to have to realize, that they're going to have to bring in legislative changes in a way that matches the technological changes.
Which has always been a challenge, hasn't it? With the law keeping up with technology. Yeah, absolutely right. Derek, I want to bring you in there because you may have some other questions that are coming in from other sources. I don't ignore you.
I've got some questions, but perhaps another perspective is where we're replacing old analog systems in public space surveillance in town centres. What we fail to recognise sometimes are the people that are operating these systems. So we're saying it can do all these wonderful things, but we've got to bring the operators with us with training and to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And with all due respect to them, some of them have been doing that job for 20 years, and they said, we've always done it like that, why should we change? So as much as we develop technologies that will make our life easier, we've got to bring those operators with us to make sure we maximise this technology, because if we use this very expensive kit in the way that we've always used it, we're wasting our money. So we must enhance and bring along that training element too.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, you know, I share that thought with the work that I do as well. And of course, I picked up in Tony's presentation too, that human interface you talked about in your presentation. And it's so true. You know, we can spend millions on technology and extended features, analytics, AI, etc. But we've still got people who are going to be looking. And in fact, one of my questions is, and I'm going to be selfish now and say, do we ever think then on that basis, with AI and analytics increasingly more dynamic and diverse as we go forward, will there ever be just robots in a control room, Tony?
Well, I actually think the essence of that question, isn't it, is at what point would the human intervener be not required? And I think we have to be bold enough to think, well, that point may come. And it would only come, I think, when the decisions that were made were hitting such a level of accuracy that people recognized that you didn't need a human intervener. That's the argument on the one hand. The argument on the other hand is that we're dealing with life and society, and they're complex. The movements of humans are complex that perhaps can't be defined by an algorithm. So I'm going to jump off the fence. I think it's a great question. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that when we're impacting with the power of the state on the citizen, there must always be a human intervener. And in 5 years' time, you'll put this clip on at Global, you say how old-fashioned that was and how wrong was the old commissioner. No wrong.
Good answer, thank you. Christian, you were very vehemently nodding, or saying no, in fact. You weren't nodding, you were shaking your head.
It's like we will not take humans out of the equation for a very long time. And as we like to say at Genetech, artificial intelligence does not exist, but real stupidity does.
I should remember that one, thank you.
But the thing is, like when we're looking at artificial intelligence, right? We like to think about it more as intelligent automation. And we can teach a computer how to play chess, and it can beat the world's leading player of chess. But it cannot play checkers, it cannot play any other games, it can't play Monopoly, right? So we can use these technologies to help weed out a lot of the noise and basically help make the decision maker's job easier by filtering out some of the garbage. But at the end of the day, for certain types of jobs, you require human intervention, you require a judgment call that a computer cannot make. So let's leverage this technology to help us scale our operations and help us kind of do more with less and do things more intelligently, but it will not replace us anytime soon.
It's good to hear. I mean, that's my answer when I get asked that question a lot in the training room with operational staff and the context of AI. That's the sort of answer I would give. Not as eloquently as that, I have to say, so I shall steal some of those words. But thank you very much. Okay, I want to go on now. This is one directly for you, Philip. So, praise indeed for your presentation, I have to say, in the question that comes from Matthew Bull from the ISJ, the International Security Journal, one of our sponsors today. So it's asked that from the intelligence perspective, do you think that the balance is now right between security and privacy? Because that mantra's been around for a while, that balance to strike between providing security and respecting privacy. What's your thought on that?
Matthew, the fiver's in the post for planting that question. Thank you for that. It's an interesting one, and it ties in with a lot of what Tony was saying earlier. I think you're never going to get the balance right because the threat changes, the circumstances change, that your methodologies have to adapt depending on the threat that's there. And remember, and the intelligence game is trying to predict what's going to happen in the future with the information that you've got today, which tend to be a 10 million piece jigsaw puzzle. In fact, 10 million jigsaw piece puzzles put together, all thrown in one big pot, and you don't know what the final picture is going to be. And you're trying to put that together. And this is where there's the balance of making sure that you can use technology, you balance the freedoms out against what you're gathering, and it's very difficult to put together. If an intelligencer could predict the future, none of us would be sitting here. We'd all be multimillionaires winning the lottery every week. It's very easy whenever an incident happens looking back with 20/20 hindsight, because you've then got the picture to choose all the little bits that go together and go, that's where that was. You had all that in the bucket beforehand. Why didn't you know about it? And that's what we get wrong. However, when it comes to the checks and balances, this is where the independent commissioners that oversee the different intelligence agencies, and there are a number of them that are sitting there independently auditing what the intelligence agencies are doing. The processes and procedures that they've got in place with a number of different acts of Parliament that are providing them their checks and balances, and the processes that they have to go through are actually, I would argue, fit for purpose. 30 years ago, they weren't fit for purpose. They didn't exist. I'd argue they're fit for purpose now. Does that mean they're perfect? No. There needs to be legislative changes because the threat's changing, technology's changing, society's changing, and therefore we need to try and keep up with that. And it's almost as difficult for the intelligence organisations to keep up with the legal frameworks because things are changing so rapidly in the same way that the technological legislation isn't keeping up with the technological framework changes. Yeah. So a slightly sort of fuzzy answer, but I don't think there is an exact answer to that question.
No, it's interesting in terms of the balance to strike, and just I remember the commissioner saying in one of his previous presentations, about just because we can, should we? And that recognising, okay, we can do an awful lot of security provision, but should we, in relation to people's privacy and indeed the overall, has it justified? Do we really need to do it?
And we don't. I was involved in something which could have taken someone who had been responsible for killing a large number of people in a different country in the world, and got the evidence to arrest them and take them away. The technology that we needed to do that required special authorisation. The authorisation level needed to happen at ministerial level back in the UK. There was a legal submission put together that was blue lighted to the minister's house in the middle of the night. The minister was woken up, signed it to go ahead with it, but it was too late to come in because a window of opportunity closed. The agency did not carry out that operation because it hadn't gone through the right processes to get the checks and balance in place to make sure that everything could be done from a proportional and necessary perspective. We justified that, but also making sure that we had the audit trail that was there. And therefore, the national agencies do take this very seriously at the moment, and all of those other organisations that work to them don't. I'll caveat that with one thing. It's very easy to find criticism somewhere because these are all human beings. And once you add in the human factor to something, people are making judgment calls. And one person's assessment that judgment call's right could be another person's assessment that judgment call's wrong. And therefore, you'll always get friction between the decisions and how they're signed off.
Tony, any thoughts from you on this particular theme?
Yeah, slightly different angle, actually. Security and privacy is a valid and ongoing debate, but I talked about the tumbleweed going across the conference in Brussels. And I do think there's something about those using this technology, those acting on behalf of the state, being more effective at making their case. Yeah. Because I've tracked the last 12 months, 2 years on AI and face. And those winning the debate really have been the civil libertarians, the privacy groups, the action groups. Because they have more freedom, they can go hard. And the police, I think, law enforcement, the government, I think, have been fairly timid in its defence and promoting its value. And I think that needs to change.
Agree 100%.
Yeah. OK. Thanks for that, Ian. Christian, I want to bring you back in again with extending it to a wider question now, really. It's around drone technology, and where do you see, from your perspective, the use, the expansion of drone technology, and indeed perhaps here in the UK also?
So drone technology, like any other technology, has its pros and cons. If you're willing to go fetch that drone stuck in a tree every now and then, I guess, maybe a drone might be the good thing for you. I think it just needs to be weighed in terms of, what problem are you trying to solve, and is the drone the right approach to solving it? I think we're seeing more and more of these devices being deployed, but there's I'm not a very personal believer in them changing the world. I think they're just another tool in the toolbox that can be used in certain contexts and certain environments. And I'm just gonna kind of add on to what was just said with respect to security versus privacy. Sorry, I spelled it or I pronounced it differently. But, also going back to a comment that Tony made earlier, I think, GDPR and some of the other legislation is actually driving a lot of innovation and a lot of advancements in the realm of privacy. So we have much more tools at our disposal today to actually implement security with a much higher degree of privacy controls to potentially allow for more overt and more open security without necessarily giving the keys to anybody and everybody. So, with technologies such as blockchain, different forms of cryptography, we can have higher accountability, non-repudiation, and also a better control of how that data is used and by whom. So there's a lot of advancements going there that we've been seeing over the past little while.
Okay, thank you for that. Derek, go on.
Well, there's a question which perhaps follows on from what Chris Antonio is saying. So this is Robert from Say Communications, and asking, is it a concern to you that the police use of automatic facial recognition is coming under greater scrutiny than the private use of the same systems? And I know you and I, David, spoke about this the other day because you've done some data protection impact assessments, privacy impact assessments for a private organisation.
That's correct, yeah.
And so are they escaping under the radar, whereas the scrutiny is all on public space surveillance and the state surveillance, I suppose?
Well, it's a question I had myself written down here to expand with Tony, because we know a lot of your emphasis clearly across the whole of your commission has been focused primarily on those public sectors which are police and local authority orientated, but nonetheless urging with great success in many places the voluntary adoption of your of standards that you introduce, well, the code of practice that you oversee, and the toolbox that you've given us. So yeah, it is about that non-police use of AFR. You touched on it, if I was listening correctly, Tony. You touched on it in your presentation around it could be lawful in some circumstances if the ingredients are right, depending upon the deployment that was being envisaged, as when we knew there where it fell down in the Bridges case, which is law enforcement. So the question is, in a nutshell, is around your views then really on the non-police use of AFR. Can it be lawful? Is it acceptable? And I mean, I've had my challenges in working through advising clients around on the DPIA side of that, and making this not just making it up for making it up's sake, truly justifying the correct and ethical use of that technology when people's biometric data is at stake.
Okay, this is on the money. There is no guidance that has emerged yet in relation to private use of biometric processing, and I think that's a real gap. I'm concerned that there is an overly restricted approach to this as we move forward, because I think there are many and varied uses that are lawful and legitimate. I can see the courts being further involved, but I think industry, businesses, manufacturers, whoever, will need to be very clear about their justification, very sharp and focused. I can see 101 uses for this technology, but it's going to take people like you that are filling out the DPIA and looking at the appropriate policy documents, looking at the legitimacy impact assessments and the Schedule 9 Item 20G criteria. But there needs to be, underpinning all of that, a common sense landing zone for people in the room so that they understand that they're moving towards legitimacy. Not to have that years into the Data Protection Act, years after LFR has been around, I think is disappointing, and I'm looking forward to that picture changing rapidly. So the bottom line is, I think it can be used lawfully. I think we need to be very clear about our justifications. And I think the government will have a look at this and try and streamline the sort of rationale for its legitimate, safe use that will command the confidence of the public and will provide an overarching oversight that people think, yeah, that facial recognition is being used lawfully. I'm sure it can happen.
Whether that be in the private sector or indeed in the public sector. So that complete umbrella, so there's consistency across the deployments in any circumstance. Yeah.
I believe that's required, and I think the regulators need to get together in the absence of statute that provides that rock solid foundation, and actually do what they're paid for and provide that guidance. I'm very clear on that.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Philip, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think there's just another bit that needs to be added to that. And this is not a regulator's responsibility, a manufacturer's responsibility, but it's an individual's responsibility. And I think individuals need to understand their digital exposure. How many people are going around with a telephone that they unlock by looking at it, using facial recognition software? That data is being held somewhere. Do you know where it is? Did you check when you signed the terms and conditions? No. How many people know what's happening and what their friends are doing when they're tagging pictures on Facebook and other social media? That is recording your biometric data somewhere that can be used in a way that it hasn't or is not being regulated by any of the government organisations. And no matter how much we criticise government regulation and control, it's an awful lot better than there is out there in the commercially driven market. Google knows more about you than any government will ever know about you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Christian, can I bring you in on this one? I mean, again, from your perspective, from the Genetec perspective, you must be engaging in a lot of this technology, and from a private sector point of view.
Well, I definitely, going with respect to the comments on the big tech, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they know so much about you. People, fail to realize, what they're giving up when they're signing up for these so-called free services. Nothing is free in this world. If something is free, especially in this context, you are the product, and they're leveraging you to monetize you. And, going back to regulation and oversight, there's very little. Like, the world is waking up to it, but they've been doing it for what, 10 plus years? So it's time for some form of a wake-up call to realize, what's happening with that data and that information.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, I'm very conscious of time because we are running out of time rapidly. So I need to say thank you to the panel for answering the questions that you have taken. I'm sure there's quite a few more which we'll get round to dealing with after the event has closed. But can I say a personal thank you to each of you for participating, being out there in your different parts of the globe. So Tony down there in the south of France, Christian, of course, over there in Canada, Philip here in the studio, and with Derek as well, of course, and ourselves. So thank you, gentlemen, for your participation in that and getting through the questions that we did. But it's now time for me to bring the event to a close, and I do, of course, have some closing remarks to make. So let me just get to my appropriate page, and that's it. So I don't forget anybody or anything as we go through this. First and foremost, of course, is to thank everybody out there for taking the 90 minutes out of your diaries to join us today for our online event. Bigger, exciting things hopefully will happen next year, and we would look forward to seeing you if you're able to join us in March, we're hoping for, if circumstances are right. But for now, thanks again for you being there and participating with it. Thanks for all your questions. I know there wasn't a massive amount of time to get through all of them, but we thank you for that. Thanks, of course, as always, to our fantastic speakers, because, again, without them, the content would be just me and Derek, and you wouldn't want that. So, again, really appreciate their time and efforts to bring the content to you during the day. Of course, our sponsors themselves, Genetec, Palco, and the International Security Journal, have kindly assisted us in putting this programme together, making this event come forward for you in an online forum. And we couldn't have done it either without the guys here at the Isted studio. They're great friends of ours in our regular events we have in Bristol. They've supported us with this one from a great studio. The technology here to bring this to you is fantastic. So finally, a big thank you from me to Derek for inviting me to chair this event as well as his normal events, and also for him to take the enormous effort and with him and Paula and all the team around them to bring this event together. We thank you for running it. Thank everybody for participating, and that nicely brings this event to a close. And all I can say to you is goodbye. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care.